Welcome back. I'm Jack Bradley in for Steve Lance. The U.S. federal budget deficit will reach a $1.9 trillion this fiscal year. And that's according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which projects the deficit will grow to $2.8 trillion by 2034. What led to this record high deficit, and what are the implications of all of this? Joining me now is Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, to discuss these latest projections. Brandon Arnold, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Brandon, the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan agency, now says that the federal budget deficit will reach nearly $2 trillion this fiscal year. That's roughly $400 billion, or 27% higher than its earlier projections in February. What policy decisions and legislation led to this ballooning of the federal deficit?
Yeah, and it really is a ballooning. This is a massive increase in debt that is going to be borne by the public, by taxpayers. And this is driven by a couple factors. The biggest factors are the decision to forgive hundreds of billions of dollars in student debt. That is a debt that is incurred by students to go to college and is now being transferred to taxpayers. The other big change that's happened since February was the passage of an enormous spending package to provide aid to Ukraine and Israel, as well as to provide support for natural disasters that have taken place. Now, the problem with that, in my opinion, is less about the substance of the bill and more about the fact that Congress refused to offset that spending with commensurate reductions in other less necessary programs. So that is, again, being tacked onto our nation's credit card bill at a time when we are maxing out that credit card.
So now, for what this all means, the CBO also projects the deficit to grow to $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years. What does this growing deficit mean for the future of Social Security and Medicare?
Yeah, the problem is that we have these structural problems with our big entitlement programs. We have an aging demographic. People are getting older, so they are, instead of paying into these systems, drawing benefits out of the system. On top of that, debt is very expensive now. It's really expensive to borrow money, whether you're trying to buy a house or whether you're trying to finance the operations of the federal government. So all these things are contributing to structural imbalances across the federal government, which will necessitate, if they're not addressed, will necessitate either massive benefit cuts. When we talk about Social Security, you could see 20% benefit cuts just about 10 years from now. Or if they want to shore up the programs, you're looking at massive tax increases that will be really harmful to current workers and really slow down our economic growth and job creation potential.
The Congress is working right now to pass appropriations bills. How will they influence the deficit, and are they likely to pass before the current spending bills expire?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen here is they're going to avoid doing anything major before the election. They don't want to rock the boat, Republicans and Democrats alike, before the election. But what the House in particular is doing right now is trying to start to curb spending. The spending bills they work on only covers about a third of total federal spending, but we need to cut wherever we can. We need to start making reductions and being more fiscally responsible in every single aspect of our federal budget. And I think that's what Republicans in the House in particular are doing right now. The 12 spending bills they're doing are not perfect by any stretch, but they are starting to make those trims that are necessary to start to turn this entire budget picture around and start to be a little bit more responsible.
Now, for one of the bills in particular, the Financial Services Bill, talk to us a bit about the cuts made to the IRS and the FTC and what impact this would have.
Yeah, I think this is the most important of the 12 bills. And one of the reasons is the IRS has been off the rails. And, they got this enormous plus up in the Inflation Reduction Act of $80 billion. And only about 5%, less than 5% of that is going to what really is needed at the IRS. And that is improving taxpayer services, making sure that they're answering the phones, responding to taxpayer inquiries to make sure people get their taxes right the first time they file them. The vast majority of taxpayers are trying to do the right thing when they file their taxes. They're not trying to cheat the system. They're not trying to break the law. Instead, what the IRS has done is dedicate too much of this funding to enforcement mechanisms, going after bad actors. Of course, we need to go after bad actors, but you have a lot fewer bad actors when you're able to address taxpayer concerns and questions up front. So I think the IRS has really misplaced priorities and is deserving of another trim to its budget here. The FTC, which I think has been another bad actor in the federal budget, they have gone after every industry in America, from big tech to big sandwiches to grocery companies to high-end fashion companies, all with this notion that they know best rather than consumers. They've completely abandoned the consumer welfare standard, which is to say the government should only go after companies when consumers are being harmed. Now they're taking a more proactive position when it comes to antitrust policy, and I think that's really to the detriment of our economy and certainly to consumers.
Brandon Arnold, thank you very much for your insight here today.
Thanks for having me.